Contact centers experienced a significant boom in the late 90s and early 2000s thanks to the advent of internet connectivity and telephones. This evolution enabled 24/7 customer service, giving rise to offshore contact centers that could operate at a fraction of the cost, transforming industries like banking, insurance, and telecommunications. Now, over 2 decades later, we stand at the brink of another transformative wave with the advent of generative AI. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Analytics Inside podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving technology space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Now, the benefits of generative AI in particular are becoming increasingly evident as these advanced technologies are integrated into various outsourcing processes. Now, by leveraging AI and other related technologies, outsourcing companies can streamline operations, enhance efficiency, and improve customer service. So, today we have Mr. Mandar Mutalikdesai, Vice President and Head of Data Science at 24/7.ai. And we are going to talk about how generative AI is transforming agent training for seamless customer experiences within the BPOs. Hi, Mandar. How are you doing?
Hi, Priya. Thanks for having me on your podcast. It's an honor. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great.
How are you?
Great, I'm doing good too, and it's a pleasure to have you with us on our podcast. So let's just get started with it because it seems quite interesting as to how BPOs can, increase their efficiency when they're trying to leverage generative AI. But before that, let's just talk about your company and about yourself. So if you can just brief us about what exactly is 24/7.ai, specialization, or particular solutions that you guys are offering.
So 24/7.ai has been a leading provider of digital business services, solutions, and products in the customer experience space for over 24 years. We have been at the forefront of innovation in the customer engagement, customer experience space. We've been delivering a lot of significant business improvements to some of the world's top brands. In fact, so we are currently serving, I think, more than 250 global brands. We are a 15,000 plus strong workforce. We are spread across 18 locations in 11 countries. And we essentially combine our class leading AI powered CX platform with our deep operational expertise in the BPO space. And that's how we're able to deliver consistent, hyper personalized, proactive experiences to our customers.
Great. Sounds pretty interesting, Mandar. Thank you for letting us know about 24/7 AI. So moving ahead, we would also want to know about yourself, your journey till date, and your specific role and contribution towards the company.
Yeah, I've been with 24/7.ai for a little over 3 years now, and it's been a very exciting journey for me. I joined here, basically kind of leading the intersection between AI and product. And I still continue to work at that intersection, albeit with some additional responsibilities. Today, I head AI charter for the company. My job is to work very closely with product and engineering primarily, and also other stakeholders to make sure that all the AI innovations, all the machine learning innovations that are happening within my group are actually seeing light of day and are moving the needle in terms of providing a business value to our clients.
Great. Thank you so much. And your profile definitely seems pretty interesting, Mandar. Moving ahead, if you talk about, I think since years, BPO providers have been delivering solutions and services to optimize their customers' back and front office operations. Now, from customer service to sales, so these companies were able to offer a diverse array of services that directly impacted their customers' profitability. Now, by harnessing the power of cutting edge technologies like AI, BPO companies can not only streamline and automate processes like data entry or document processing, but also take care of customer service and sales to some next level heights with some improved personalization as well. So I
Right.
wanted to understand from you, how does generative AI specifically apply to the training of customer service agents in BPOs?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question you're asking there. In fact, I think that question has multiple facets to it. For one
Mm-hmm.
thing, generative AI, I think it's been very pioneering kind of force, right? It has a pioneering potential, rather, I should not, I should say. And that potential is definitely undeniable. And with respect to the customer experience space, I feel like when it comes to the agent experience side of things, generative AI largely influences two or three different facets, like I was saying. One is, of course, how do we onboard agents, right? How do you onboard the right kind of skill set to solve the right kind of problems? The second is how do we train agents ongoing basis? But there is one more additional facet to this, an interesting one, which is once an agent is onboarded and they've been trained and they are on the production floor answering calls and taking chats from end users, helping companies connect with their end users, then how do we assist that agent in terms of having efficient and effective conversations? How do we make sure that these conversations are taking place in a way that reduces the average handling time of each conversation, increases the overall customer satisfaction, and in general provides a more wholesome experience to the agent themselves, right? Like making the right kind of data source available to them at the right time, giving them the right kind of recommendations about the next best action and the next best response in a given scenario and such like. So when it comes to agent training itself, I think the generative AI has the potential to kind of provide us a significant departure in terms of how training has been traditionally taking place, which is largely classroom led, trainer led. The content is not entirely static. It does evolve, but of course it is limited by how much the trainer is bottlenecked, right? And what's the ratio of trainer to trainees. So given all this, I think the way generative AI comes into picture is in terms of providing continuous learning, because it is capable of looking at content that is evolving rapidly and providing that to the trainer and the trainees. The second aspect it influences is, I feel, personalization. You don't have to anymore think of training as being a classroom training where the same kind of teaching is being done for every single agent, for every single trainee. So there's personalization that's possible now. And more importantly, there is a scope for more frequent and continuous feedback, which is generally very difficult in a classroom kind of setting, right? Or even in other automated settings. So I think this is how generative AI can largely influence agent training per se. And like I was saying, once the agent has moved from the training floor to the production floor, then they could get assistance in terms of an assistive AI feature like a co-pilot of sorts, which will give them recommendations about what to do next and even what to say next.
Right, yeah, definitely makes sense. And just to add to what you said, I was just reading this study, and it said that 80% of employees believe that generative AI will help them increase revenue as well as profits by enhancing the relationships with customers and boosting customer satisfaction scores. So I think that's an important role that generative AI is playing in helping enhance the agent training, which in turn helps them to build a loyal and a trustworthy relationship with their customers. So, and moving ahead, I think when we're talking about contact center industries, I think these companies have already been using a variety of AI-enabled solutions to make sure that they're delivering an efficient customer service. However, the potential application of generative AI reaches far beyond just customer experience, I believe. It can also be a very valuable tool for supporting, engaging, or as well as empowering agents within the contact center. So you discussed about like how new technologies are probably changing agent training compared to the traditional methods. So I wanted to understand what are some of the key benefits that you guys have observed while using generative AI in agent training compared to the traditional methods.
Yeah, there's been a McKinsey survey that says that generative AI could add anywhere between 2.6 trillion to 4.4 trillion dollars in revenue annually, right? And that is
Mhm.
huge. The opportunity size here is really immense, and
Yeah.
75% of which they see being done in four sectors primarily: customer experience, marketing and sales, software engineering, and R&D, right? And customer experience is what is of interest to us today, right? And the I think the Everest Group further predicts that the customer experience space itself, thanks to the evolution of generative AI, is expected to grow at a CAGR of roughly about 28% between 2021 to 2026. So yeah, I completely agree with you about the opportunity size here. It is huge. And sure enough, we are seeing benefits of generative AI solutions, LLM based solutions for our clients. I can give you a very simple example of how it has been influencing the day-to-day operations of the agents of one of our clients, right? I would not like to name them, but we have a product where our agents are able to kind of have simulated conversations with a simulated visitor, right? So this is on the training floor. The agent, as far as they are concerned, they've just received a chat from a purported visitor, and this visitor is really generative AI. It's really an LLM that's behaving as if it were a visitor, right? Now, what this platform helps our agents do is pick different dispositions, pick different kinds of personalities. For example, you might say, okay, let's look at a gentleman from, let's say, born in the 60s, is currently upset about an issue that they had brought to us previously, right? Now, that's the initial configuration that they can set. And the LLM or the generative AI model will start simulating that particular user. It will basically become a simulacrum of that particular user and start interacting with the agent. Now, this provides a great ground for the agent to practice for what's about to happen on the production floor with a real visitor. And when we speak with our agents, what they tell us is the experience that they have with real visitors out on the production floor is not wildly different from the kind of experiences they've had with the simulated visitor on the training floor, right? So that's just one of the examples. And of course, the kind of benefits that generative AI drives on the whole, at an abstracted level, is much higher. And it's not just in terms of in terms of agent training or even the larger agent excellence capsule, right? So we can think about it in terms of how conversation automation gets better. We are seeing an uptick in automation, some of our clients, which means that fewer and fewer conversations actually get escalated to an agent. Most of them are contained within the bot, right? But for the conversations that do end up with an agent, we are seeing a reduction in the average handling times, in the average response times of the agents. We are seeing a greater adherence to policies and norms. And in general, we are seeing a higher quality of conversations for the customers, which reflects in the customer satisfaction score.
Right. I think the benefits are quite impressive, Mandar. And I really like the last point where generative AI is helping drive some quality conversations, which eventually helps in strengthening the bond with customers and also ensuring that they're kind of delivering personalized and positive customer experiences as well.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but as we move ahead, I think any such technology that we talk about, like today we are talking about generative AI. Earlier we had artificial intelligence or machine learning. So it took time, I guess, because most companies grapple with the challenge of effectively integrating any new AI advancement into their business operations. And to count, like I recently read a Harvard Business Review article which was talking about the impact of GenAI on the BPO industry, and it suggests that companies shouldn't try to completely replace human jobs with automation, but they should just sit back and wait for issues with Gen AI to be fixed. So I think that becomes very confusing as to what exactly a company should do. What are some best practices that
Right.
we can adopt? So we wanted to know from you if you could tell us some of the key factors or best practices that BPO should consider when integrating Gen AI into their training programs.
Yeah, I think this is $1 million question. Before we begin there, right, let's look at the journey that has led us to this point where generative AI has kind of taken over public consciousness, right? In a lot of discourses, we see that there's sort of a dichotomy between ML AI and generative AI, right? In fact, they're not all that orthogonal to each other. They're very related concepts, and surprisingly so. For example, whenever we say AI is a goal. AI is not a tool unto itself, right? And machine learning is one of the methods, one of the ways in which to achieve artificial intelligence, right? So, what we have today in terms of a discourse on generative AI is basically a discourse on how do we achieve a particular ideal? How do we achieve intelligence that is capable of generating content similar to how a human would, right? Now, the key thing to note here is that we're talking about generating content similar to how a human would. I don't think anybody's talking about how do we replace human beings, right? I think that's one key thing to remember, because at the end of the day, for any large language model, the source of training data, the source of any kind of understanding is human interactions, right? That is what powers generative AI today, and that has to remain that way. Now, specific to BPOs, what are some things to be considered when integrating AI into the tech portfolio? I think for the most part, a lot of the companies will get the technology strategy right. Right. I think the technology infrastructure and strategies, I don't see that becoming a major bottleneck. That's not going to be a problem. Where we really need to focus and be very aware, self aware, is first in terms of devising the right kind of data strategy and achieving the right kind of data maturity. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of data that will reside inside any enterprise, right? And I'm not even talking about the internet. Inside the enterprise, there is always a lot of data. Now, naturally, this data exists in multiple silos, right? So the first challenge is going to be how are we going to federate all of this data? How are we going to bring this all together so that all of it feeds into a single pipeline, ideally, and which then informs our AI technology stack, right? Including training it. So technology maturity is one thing, but data maturity for me counts higher than that. The other thing that companies will in the BPO space will do well to focus on is, in my view, observability. That is one aspect that right now is not receiving the kind of attention that it probably should have. What I mean by that is that you see that there's a lot of effort, which is piecewise, which is, in small bits and pieces here and there in MLOps, machine learning operations, right? Now that idea needs to be extended. Idea needs to be generalized to include operations for LLMs, for generative AI, and then to include observability. And what do we mean by that? We're talking about being able to monitor our models, being able to monitor on an ongoing basis what are the kind of performance metrics we are seeing with our models, what exactly has been the behavior of our models, what kind of business metrics are they helping influence. Now, without this, we're going to be flying blind, right? And we don't want to fly blind, obviously. So, an observability pipeline will help organizations be more proactive. If you do not have an observability pipeline, then you're only going to be able to react to situations. You're going to react to a situation where, say, for a particular client, something didn't work. Maybe calls are getting escalated a lot for the last 2 days. Now, you're only going to be able to react to that. But is it possible to see this coming? I think it absolutely is. And so it's very important to invest in a pipeline for ML ops, LLM ops, and observability, where we are able to monitor our models proactively on an ongoing basis, not just in terms of their performance metrics, but also in terms of how they move the needle in terms of business value. How are they doing in terms of, say, containment in the case of BPOs, which is how many of our conversations can be contained within the bot itself, as opposed to having them escalated to an agent. How are the models influencing, say, the first contact resolution rate, right? It's important to keep an eye on some of these business metrics. And it's not very easy to do that unless you have the data maturity that we just spoke about, right? So there is a lot of data that can give you insights about things like containment, metrics like average handling times, response times. But to bring all of those together and be able to view them, so to say, in a single dashboard as part of an observability pipeline will require a high amount of data maturity, and two, a lot of maturity and willingness to invest in an observability pipeline. And then what follows this should be explainability, right? How can we explain the behavior of the model? So observability is about saying, okay, I know how the model is doing, right? But am I also able to say why the model behaved the way it behaved, right? So that then becomes explainability, which also informs, our requirements in terms of, is the model perhaps undergoing any kind of bias? Is it learning some kind of bias? Is it perhaps not exposed to some new data? Has there been some data drift? Has there been some drift in terms of concept, right? That all of those questions then get informed by explainability.
Right, it definitely makes sense, Mandar, and I pretty much agree with your point where you mentioned that companies need to have a certain level of data maturity, because what happens is in the excitement of or probably leveraging the benefits of AI or generative AI, they tend to probably don't make sense from data that they're trying to gather from different sources or tools. So that becomes a hurdle when you're trying to integrate and leverage effectively all the benefits that probably you want to get, because data is at the core of all these tools and technologies. And
Yeah.
if you really can't make sense of data, it becomes very difficult to optimize their operations and ensure that the purpose or the goal that for which you have been implementing such technologies is met. Otherwise, it becomes a big challenge that way.
Absolutely, and it's tall order to achieve all of these at the same time, right? To
Yeah,
achieve generative AI capabilities, to achieve data maturity, to inform those generative AI capabilities, and then to also have an observability and explainability pipeline all at the same
right.
time is a really tall order. So it's not going to be a discrete event in time where all of these just check the green box. It's not going to happen, right? It's going to take
Yeah.
a long period of time. I think this itself has its own maturity curve in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh, uh,
I mean, you mentioned about, observability and explainability. And of course, we have been reading about all of this, but I think that you explained it in a very simpler way for me, who's probably not a non-technical background. So it becomes very easier for us to understand the implications of these concepts that you helped us explain. So I just want to touch upon the point where you said that, it's very important as to how models are probably able to explain themselves. So whether, we're talking about the model bias and are we ensuring that all the models are fairly trained and deployed. So I think that's one of the challenge that probably companies across all different industries are facing, as to how do we ensure that the generative models that we're implementing are bias free and they're fair and transparent enough. So you of course highlighted that point, but I want to understand what strategies do you use to ensure that all the models are fair, transparent, and they're free from bias.
Yeah, definitely bias is, and it has been a question for the ages, right? It's been around as a challenge even before the advent of generative AI. So bias definitely is one problem to solve, but now with generative AI, there is a sort of a sister problem of bias, which is hallucination, right? So I'm going to sort of see if I can, answer your question with both of these issues in mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think one of the major issues that enterprises today are facing is that while LLMs are extremely powerful in terms of their expressiveness, in terms of how they're able to bring together a vast amount of data, sift through a huge amount of data and come up with insights in what they generate. I think that's very impressive. But the problem that goes hand in hand with that capability is that there's also a fair amount of bias and hallucination, right? And I don't think it can be argued that one of the sources of that hallucination or one of the sources of that bias is the fact that most LLMs that are popular today, that we see today, are primarily trained on a huge amount of internet data, right? And well, the internet is not necessarily full of truths. I think we all know that, right? But it is one of the primary, it is probably the greatest, not probably, it is the greatest repository of content humanity has ever had access to or produced, right? So it makes sense to make use of it. I think LLMs being trained on internet data is definitely a first step, and that is why they're called foundation models, right? Now, how do enterprises address the problem of bias and hallucination? I think the first step that they would take is to say, all right, let's implement a proper RAG pipeline, right? Retrieval augmented generation pipeline, where we can show the LLM examples about exactly what kind of response we are expecting, what kind of content we are expecting to be generated, right? This is what we call few shot learning. Show it a few examples of what you're expecting, right? Now, in the best case, it would be zero shot. You wouldn't have to give it any examples and you would get everything that you need. And we know that that's unlikely. So few shot learning using a RAG framework is probably step one, or it's one of the ways to do it. The second way is to see if we can fine tune the model, right? Using our own data. So the enterprise has a lot of data. There's data coming in from, say, a conversation history for a particular client. There's data coming in from knowledge bases. There's data coming in from other auxiliary sources like order management systems, other help tools, and so on. How do we bring all of this together and fine tune the model so that to some extent, that hallucination is kind of mitigated because now you're trying to ground the foundation model or the LLM in your own data, and not just it's not just going to be grounded in its knowledge, which was gleaned from internet data, right? So it's now going to be influenced by what's in your enterprise. So that's step two. But I think with even with all of this, there is still a problem to be solved in terms of hallucination. And there are, of course, a variety of techniques that have developed over time, that look to address this problem. But I feel like we should not expect that hallucination will just go away completely, right? In fact, we need to be prepared for it. So again, I'm going to advocate an observability pipeline. That's I think a primary use case, a very significant use case that observability pipelines can serve, which is to say, how do I keep track of bias and hallucination in my systems, right? So I would say an observability pipeline, it sort of is I predict that I see that it's going to become sort of non-negotiable for large scale gen AI deployments.
Right. Thank you, Mandar, for helping us understand between hallucination and the biasness that we have currently probably companies are facing in terms of implementing the AI solutions. But overall, I think when we're talking about all these things, I think 24/7 AI is committed to delivering AI features that can help boost agent performance and equip managers with more actionable insights. That is a must say, I would say. So
Yep.
one last question for you, Mandar, would that what are some of the trends that probably you foresee or you predict that might take place with Gen AI and BPOs or in the customer service area in the next few years?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very difficult question to answer, I think, for everybody, because just looking at the breakneck pace at which this whole space has evolved since just November 2022, right? So we're looking at what, about 21 months, right? 21 months ago is when GPT 3.5 kind of made a splash. And things have progressed at a very high pace since then, right? So I don't think it's going to be easy for anybody to kind of predict what trends might or might not be seen. But I think one or two things might will definitely happen. One is that we are already seeing that there's a lot of investment in open source large language models, right? And the greatest benefit that open source models offer us is in terms of a greater degree of control, them being open sourced, meaning you actually know about the architecture of the model, you know how it was built, you know what kind of data it was trained on, and the ability to host it in your own premises, in your own infrastructure, right? And not necessarily have to depend on a cloud based LLM service, right? So I think a greater amount of investment in self-hosted large language models, a greater amount of investment in terms of fine-tuning self-hosted LLMs for enterprise use cases, and observability. I would say those are some things that we can look forward to. There's already an uptick in the number of startups in the ML ops space and that are adapting to the generative AI challenge. So I think that is set to grow.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you as to overall aspects that you mentioned. And if I would want to conclude, I would say that generative AI definition definitely has a lot of potential, not just for business process outsourcing companies, but also for other companies to streamline operations, enhance efficiency, and also deliver quality and a high level quality and a superior customer service. And while we're talking about, we know that there are different facets of a BPO industry. And when we talk about the integration of generative AI, I think they can do a lot of things from automating routine tasks to reducing human error, to providing insightful data analytics. And that eventually helps companies to foster and thrive on strategic decision making across different levels. So thank you so much, Mandar. It was a pleasure having you with us on a podcast. I think we learn more about the use cases of generative AI across BPOs and agent training, customer service. So it was quite insightful to have a discussion on this.
Oh, my pleasure. I'd just like to end with one final comment.
Sure, sure.
Just this morning, I came across this. Sequoia has recently said that the tech industry is going to need about $600 billion in revenue for this Gen AI investment to make sense, right? And that should give us, instead of sounding threatening to me, that actually sounds like what's the opportunity size here, really, right?
Hmm.
There's a
Right.
huge amount of opportunity here for us to drive value for our end users, for our clients and their customers. And the right kind of proxy, I think, for that value is revenue, right? So which is where I
Mhm.
think a lot of discipline and focus in terms of how we are engineering our generative AI solutions, how we are looking to scale them, how we are building observability pipelines for them, how we are building the right kind of data as well as technology infrastructure for them. All of this is going to matter.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it depends as to how fast enough that companies are able to shift from a reactive to a proactive approach, and understanding that, okay, it's not about that it's going to threaten your jobs, but it's like you mentioned about the opportunity size that people can capitalize on. So that is very important, and thank you for putting that out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Priya. Thanks for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Great, likewise, Mandar. So this is for our listeners. Stay tuned for upcoming podcast, and you can view and listen all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.